The rain came down in relentless sheets, drumming on the fractured panes of the observatory's skylight like 1,000 impatient fingers. Water trickled through the cracks, tracing silver paths along the iron ribs of the dome before dripping onto the dusty floor below. Each drop struck the same spot with metronomic precision, plink, 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 counting out the seconds Elias had left on Earth. He didn't bother to move the bucket anymore. Let it flood, let the whole place drown. The telescope had already been blinded years ago by budget cuts and apathy, its great lens capped and forgotten. Tonight the only instrument that mattered was the one in his chest, ticking too fast, too loud, too alive for a man who had outlived almost everyone he'd ever loved. Elias's hands shook as he unfolded the photograph for the 100,000th time. The edges were soft as cloth now, the image nearly rubbed away by decades of thumb and regret. Mara's face still grinned out at him, 29 years old forever, her dark hair whipping sideways in wind that smelled of high desert and possibility. She was pointing at something just beyond the frame, always pointing, always chasing the next impossible thing. Behind her, Elias, 31, still believing in tenure and forever, had his arms slung around her shoulders like a man who thought the universe could be tamed. They had named the comet together, half drunk on cheap red wine and youth, scribbling equations on a napkin at the campus diner. Mara had insisted on Hale Bopp Revisited, because everything, she said, deserved a second chance. Even comets, even people. He had promised her they would watch it return together. She had laughed and kissed him and said, "Don't be stupid, Eli. I'll be ancient by then." Neither of them had imagined ancient would mean 41, taken by a drunk driver on a rain-slick road outside Tucson while Elias was in Prague presenting a paper neither of them cared about anymore. The years after had been quiet. Too quiet. He published what was required, taught freshmen who confused Orion with Airbus, and waited. 53 years was nothing to gravity, it was everything to a heart. Tonight the wait ended. Elias climbed the iron ladder to the observing platform, boots clanging on rungs slick with moss and memory. His knees protested, but he ignored them the way he ignored everything else these days. At the top he paused, breathing hard, and looked out through the open slit in the dome. The sky was a bruised, violent thing, clouds boiling like milk left too long on the stove. Lightning flickered inside them, illuminating the valley below in strobing white, abandoned vineyards, the dried-up riverbed, the single-lane road that hadn't been paved since Reagan. He checked his watch, 2:11 a.m., then the printout taped to the railing, its corners curled and ink blurred by earlier leaks. His own handwriting, spidery and certain. Right ascension 17 42 meters 12s, declination -28 degrees 14 feet 06. The numbers hadn't changed in 20 years of checking and rechecking. He had run them forward through every perturbation catalog known to man, accounted for Jupiter's tug, Saturn's whisper, even the pathetic sigh of solar wind. The comet was late, yes, but it was coming. It had to be. 2:14. The rain eased, as though the sky itself were holding its breath. Elias felt it in his bones first, a subtle shift, the way the air changes just before snow. Then the clouds parted with impossible grace, peeling back from the zenith like silk drawn across skin. Stars spilled through the gap, fierce and cold and ancient. There. At first it was only a smudge, a thumbprint of light where no thumbprint should be. Elias's heart stuttered. He raised the old 10x50 binoculars that hung from a nail, lenses cracked, one eyepiece missing, and there it was, the nucleus, bright as a struck match, flanked by two tails that fanned outward in delicate, impossible blue. Ion and dust, angel wings made of fire and frost. He lowered the binoculars. His eyes burned, but he refused to blink. Not yet, Mara, he said, and the name cracked in his throat like thin ice. He lifted the photograph until her paper face aligned with the comet's glowing head. The fit was perfect, as though the universe had measured twice and cut once. For one suspended moment they occupied the same space, his wife and her comet, separated by 53 years in the thin, permeable membrane of death. The wind rose then, howling through the open dome, whipping his coat around his legs. The telescope groaned on its mount, a sound almost human. And in that moan Elias heard it, laughter. Her laughter. The same bright cascade that used to fill their tiny apartment when she discovered he'd labeled the spice rack in constellations. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again the comet had climbed higher, dragging its tails across the face of the Milky Way like a bride's veil. Tears ran hot down his cold cheeks, but he was smiling. Really smiling. For the first time since the police officer had stood on his doorstep with a hat in his hands and rain in his eyes. I kept the promise, he whispered to the night. I waited. The comet answered with a sudden flare, a burst of brightness that lit the observatory silver for 3 full heartbeats. In that light Elias saw everything. The dust on the floorboards arranged in the shape of their old wedding quilt, the way the raindrops on the skylight formed the exact spiral of Mara's favorite galaxy, the years folding in on themselves until past and present were the same breathless now. He stayed until the first hint of dawn bled rose along the horizon and the comet slipped behind the hills, tails fading like the last note of a beloved song. Only then did he descend the ladder, moving slowly, carefully, as though the rungs might dissolve beneath him. At the bottom he paused beneath the silent telescope and pressed the photograph to his lips one final time. The paper tasted of salt and attic and the particular sweetness of things kept too long in the dark. Then he placed it gently on the console beside Mara's old coffee mug, the one that still read World's Okayest Astronomer in chipped letters, and walked out into the wet, waiting morning. Behind him the observatory door swung shut on hinges that had not moved in 20 years. The lock clicked with soft finality, a sound that might have been goodbye, or thank you, or simply I saw you. Elias never looked back. He didn't need to. The sky was already lightening, and somewhere beyond the curve of the world a comet was racing outward again, carrying with it the laughter of a woman who had never really left.